Sveiki, čia Žaismo DNR ir mes viešime Login. Per pastaruosius 2 metus visame pasaulyje įsibėgėjo nepriklausomų žaidimų kūrėjų sukilimas. Nepriklausomų žaidimų kūrėjų projektai uždirba milijonus, o jų pasirodymas svarbus kiekvienam reikšmingam žaidimų industrijos renginiui. Šis fenomenas sukuria tobulas sąlygas ir Lietuvoje dirbantiems žaidimų kūrėjams. Mūsų žaidimų industrija dar tebėra inkubacinėje stadijoje, tad mes neturime tvirtų istorinių ryšių su svarbiausiais leidėjais, vadinasi ir negalime sėkmingai konkuruoti. Indie revoliucija suteikia unikalią progą ištrūkti iš inkubatoriaus ir parodyti savo žaidimą pasauliui. Būtent apie tai savo pranešime kalbėjo ir vienas prestižinio portalo gamasutra redaktorių Mike Rose. Nuorodą į Mike Login pranešimą rasite šio video aprašyme, o dabar siūlome trumpą interviu apie šiandieninės indie scenos realijas.
Indie is independent artist, yeah? It's not only in gaming.
Yeah.
It's music, and it's how we perceive the world.
Yeah.
And for a long time, the indie game developer we imagined as, you know, some poor guy from the basement doing games, and his meaning of life is to protect his creative liberties from those big publishers. But it feels like it changed a lot. Who is indie developer today? How do you imagine?
Yeah, so I mean, the word indie is sort of this word that a lot of people don't like to use anymore. It used to really mean something. To be able to say you were indie was sort of like the selling point. You know, if you were emailing people, you'd say, "Hi, I'm an indie developer from this." The word seems to have this stigma now for certain people, where they'd rather not use it that often. Especially the press now. It's a bit like you say, what is indie anymore? It's this broad sense now. So, you know, is someone like Notch who makes Minecraft indie? He clearly was indie at some point. He's now got all this money. He's got a team of a dozen people, and they're all, you know, sort of this big. They're one of the kind of most successful companies in Sweden. So, is he still indie? I mean, to me, I kind of don't see why not. You know, he's still independently making his own games. He's still doing them with his own vision, his own spirit. Other people would disagree. They'd say, no, he's not indie anymore. He's made too much money, or he's hired too many people. And that's fine too, but it shows that what indie now, what the word indie means, how you define it, is kind of pointless now, because it's no longer a selling point. Everybody's indie. So that's not a big thing for you anymore. And it's sort of got to the point where using that word can actually sometimes even have bad connotations. So I tend to tell people when they ask me, you know, how do you define indie and should we call ourselves indie? I just say, I try not to define it anymore, and no, don't, because everybody is, so it's not really that big thing for you anymore. So
maybe you should, you know, have additional genres like basement indie and, you know.
Oh, don't get me started. I mean, there's there's AAA indie, and there's big indie, and I don't even know what any of that stuff means. I think AAA indie apparently means that you're not really indie, you're bigger than indie, and you're also maybe got a publisher, but you've still got that spirit. And that's absolutely fine, but trying to work out terms like that to define yourself just kind of makes people laugh at you a little bit, so yes, not really worth it.
No, and well, in relation to this, there are a lot of headlines right now in the press, for example, one popular indie is flocking to PlayStation.
Yeah.
So it is clear that big publishers, you know, see the evolution of gamers as well, and they are kind of want a piece of that. Yeah, and
I mean that's one place where I guess the word indie is still living and is still kind of proving a bit useful, because for people who didn't really follow indie games as much, I guess, you know, kind of more traditional gamers who would buy their box AAA games, the word indie to them can now sort of describe these smaller games that maybe people who have been following indie games for a while wouldn't use anymore. So like you say, PlayStation, it's useful for them to be able to call games indie and maybe even have indie sections, although I guess now, on PlayStation 4, they're just getting rid of that entirely now and just mixing everything up together. But definitely it is still a useful term in certain circumstances, especially on console. So yeah, it can be useful.
Yeah, but platform holders are quite conservative, you know, about all stuff. And they could apply a lot of things in the past years, and only in this generation they are dropping a lot of conditions they had previously to allow indies to their platforms because we want them. But what are we actually witnessing here? I mean, is it some kind of milestone in the gaming industry where some kind of iron curtain falls, or is it a bunch of moths like flying to a fire and do not knowing?
It's definitely a milestone. I mean, it's interesting that it's only just sort of happening with, well, especially like with Xbox. PlayStation has maybe been kind of trying to court indies kind of just before the Vita came out, and especially on Vita, like the kind of indie thing has been massive because that's pretty much the majority of games that are coming out on the Vita now. And Microsoft as well. They've kind of started up their ID at Xbox thing last year, and that's starting to kind of show fruit now. I think these big manufacturers are starting to realise just how important it is to be helping kind of covering these developers. I mean, it's kind of taken them a while. Maybe they should have started a little bit sooner, and I guess maybe they were, but just maybe not on a grand enough scale. But it's great for everybody now, really. I mean, players get a bigger variety of games to play. The press have all of these cool, great games to cover, and some of these smaller games as well. You see all the time, like some of these smaller games get big on like a PlayStation platform or something, and then one of the sort of big AAA companies will then say, hey, that was kind of cool, and they'll start to like pick little bits and pieces, kind of the innovative bits and pieces out of games. So it's also leading to better AAA games as well. So there's really no kind of con point to it all, which is great news to me, really.
What is, in your opinion, few main reasons which led indie scene to a mainstream spotlight? Because it was almost unimaginable, to have indie developers really good representation of them on E3, for example.
Yeah.
And right now, E3 is unimaginable without them.
Yeah.
So they are demanded by mainstream as well. So what happened? I mean, what do you think? What were the main reasons?
So it was partially that big manufacturers and big publishers started to realise that some of the coolest stuff was coming out of these smaller studios, and also that it was just kind of cheaper and more accessible to work with these people as well. But it's also as well that indie developers have started to realise that there isn't sort of this kind of roadblock between them and getting onto a PlayStation console. So I still talk to developers now who, I say to them, have you thought about putting your game on PlayStation? And they say, oh, I wouldn't know how to do that. I don't know how I could. And it's so easy now to do. It's like, I'm going to say it's incredibly easy. It's not as easy as just putting a game on PC. But people say I want to put my game on a PlayStation platform, and suddenly someone from PlayStation tweets at them saying, oh, email me here. We'll start setting this in motion. That's absolutely crazy. That wouldn't have happened even 2 years ago. The thought of that happening is kind of mind-blowing, really. So it's this sort of openness, especially I keep mentioning Sony, Microsoft and Nintendo as well are doing great things, but I think Sony are showing this incredible just push for indie games, and it's making everybody very happy. So I mean, if there are any indie developers who are a bit I'm not really sure, I don't know if Sony would really care about all these other platform holders would care, you really should just go for it, because you might be surprised.
And when a game have a publisher, there is a lot of services publisher provides.
Yeah.
And there are pros and cons for developer to work with it. But one of those services was publisher was acting like a sponge between the developer and the community.
Yeah.
Because it was going through the PR management, etc.
Yeah.
And right now, when this is not non-existent in indie case, developers are open to public and to all the praise and abuse as well.
Yeah.
And this abuse, all kinds of it, Well, we have few scenarios when games were cancelled or shut down, or sequels cancelled, or just people decide to just leave the industry because they cannot bear with it.
Yeah.
So, do you think this situation needs to evolve? There has to be something done to change this a little bit, or it's just the beauty of life and you just have to.
I think if you tried to do something about this, you'd fail really badly. I mean, the problem is the internet, right? Like, people on the internet, it allows you to be anonymous, and even in cases where you're not anonymous, people still sort of act not very pleasantly on the internet, a kind of big majority of them. I mean, I don't know what the solution to those kind of things are. So, obviously I know situations like the Flappy Bird one recently, that was sort of awful for the developer. And I think one of the things we can do is try to understand those scenarios better. So I know when that was happening and he took Flappy Bird down, a lot of people just didn't understand it, and they were a bit like, oh, what an idiot. He had all that success, he was making money every day, why would he take the game down? He's absolutely crazy. But I guess it's not until you're in those people's shoes that you realize what it's like. I can't even imagine. I saw kind of a short segment of the sorts of tweets he was receiving, and I don't know if I personally, if I was receiving that barrage of kind of awfulness just constantly throughout the day, and my phone was going off all the time because I was just to read yet another person who is saying they want to kill me because I'm taking my game down. I don't know if I'd personally be able to put up with that, and I think that's one element that kind of people don't think enough about. They think about the kind of pro points of it. So yeah, he was making loads of money and his game was all over the place, but clearly the abuse that he was getting was just so overwhelming. I think if we start to tackle, we can't tackle the core issue. We can't tackle people being horrible on the internet. People have probably tried and they've probably failed because it's still going on all these years later, and the internet's been around for a while. I think it's more likely that we'd be able to try and tackle people understanding the situation and understanding why these things occur. I think that's the best we can hope for, really, in those kind of circumstances.
And final question. Yeah, so everybody knows indie here in Lithuania, but in truth, not a lot of people are familiar, because people know indie games, maybe they play some of those bigger titles, but they're not really familiar with the scene. Yeah. I think that we could improve the situation right now if you, for example, give us like 3 or 5 indie titles which are must play, which defines indie as such.
Okay, that's interesting. So, let me think. I'll try and kind of go through a timeline maybe. So, I guess one of the first ever titles which sort of attracted me to indie in the first place was World of Goo from 2D Boy. Such an amazing game, even like to this day. So, how many years? It must be about 5-6 years old now, and it's still so brilliant to play now. You know, we've got it on mobile now, for people who don't know what it is, you know, it's kind of pulling all these blobs together, building little bridges and towers to get to the end of each level, and that's just so nice. And I think it kind of touched so many people just because it was so simplistic and anybody could pick it up. You know, now that it's on mobile, people, you know, started kind of pulling these little dots together, and obviously there's a mode where you build a giant tower with all the little blobs you've saved, and it's so like adorable and it's so accessible, and it just kind of personifies everything that I think make indie games great. I mean, there was kind of Braid before it, and Braid again, absolutely fantastic game. I think that was, I think World of Goo ended up being more accessible. I don't know if it sold more copies, but the fact was that Braid was a platformer, and it already had elements in it where you needed to understand how platformers worked. And if you weren't familiar with games at all, it was going to be a lot more difficult to pick up a controller and play it. Whereas World of Goo, you drag blobs onto a screen, you know? Like, even once it came onto mobile, you're just dragging your finger across, and everybody can pick it up immediately. And I think those are the kind of games that have really helped indie games to sort of pick up. So then, Super Meat Boy, another great one that I put way too many hours into. I guess that was back in 2010 maybe. And that one, again, it was less accessible than World of Goo, but it sort of showed that there was so much more space left in platforming games. You know, there's platforming games coming out all the time, and one of the big things that kind of kills platforming games is the controls. They feel like too floaty, or they're too kind of technical, and you just can't pick it up very well, especially for people coming into games. Super Meat Boy was just, it was so lovely and flowed so well, and everything was so tight about it. And the level design was so beautiful, and of course it was very silly, and all the enemies were really stupid, and it had so many, and it had other indie developers throwing all their own kind of stuff into it as well. There was just so many things to love about that game, and I remember like taking that around about Christmas time, kind of taking it to my family's house and kind of giving them a go. And at first they were a bit like, oh, what is this, a video game? I don't want to play this. And then by the end, everyone was sat around saying, oh, let me have a go. This is so kind of interesting. And it had the depth as well. You know, you could give it to somebody and they could play the first few levels, and that was great. But then it had sort of the hardcore, ridiculously hardcore stuff towards the end, where you'd sit and play just one level for like 2 hours or something before you finally beat it. Probably with alcohol involved. So yeah, that was absolutely fantastic. Other games that have happened recently, Spelunky is probably the sort of big one for me. The interesting thing about Spelunky is that it started off incredibly not accessible. So there was like an original version which was made in Game Maker by this guy Derek Yu. He sort of made it in his spare time, and I remember playing that and feeling like it was a good game, but feeling like it was difficult to get into. There was lots of sort of intricacies about it. You really need to know video games to be able to play this game. And so when he announced this new version with these kind of bright and colourful graphics and started to show demos of it, and he'd sort of taken that core concept and made it massively accessible for more people. That was when it just sort of exploded, and I think as well, like the sort of randomly generated, procedurally generated levels wasn't a new thing, but I think Spelunky really helped to kind of start that explosion, because all of a sudden, like, you were playing this game and you were playing these just same levels over and over again. Some people, when you first play, can't even get past the first world, just these kind of 4 levels that take you about 3 minutes to complete. There were loads of people, I couldn't complete them. For like a few days, I couldn't even get past this first world. But I was playing it over and over again, because every time I was playing it, it was like this brand new experience, and there was all these new challenges and risks to try and weigh up. So Spelunky for me was kind of quite a turning point as well, and has inspired some of my very favourite games from the last couple of years as well. So, very cool, yeah. I think that's about it, yeah. Cool.
Yeah, okay, so thank you very much, and we will add links and information to games you mentioned below the video.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
For our viewers, just to download them right away.
Yeah.
And have a nice fight.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.